Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics. Another ATP Geopolitics video. When will this man just shut up? Thank you for joining. And this is going to be a map update. JR has so kindly done the mapping again today. And whenever he does that, I'm thinking, oh, there's not too much change maybe on the mapping today. Maybe I'll take a day off on doing that video. And he does it. I'm like, right, I have to do it, which is good because he keeps me pumping out the content. And it gives me an excuse to have another chat to James here from Why Ukraine, his YouTube channel. Let's flash that up for you.
Dobry day, everybody.
And before I get James to introduce himself again, for those who don't know him, he is in Ukraine, but he has 836 subscribers, not quite 1,000. Please help him to get over 1,000.
That would really, yes. Thank you very much. I would like to crest 1,000 soon.
I see what you've done there. Very good. So James, tell us about you. For those who won't know you, explain your situation.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm in Ukraine. If you saw me a couple of weeks ago, you'll notice I'm in a different location in Ukraine. Yes. I'm traveled across. I was in the International Legion for the defense of Ukraine. I got injured, and now I'm going to be rejoining soon enough. Yeah, I see Quasar just said this was a surprise.
With this, I got the timing wrong as well. I put 2 hours time and then realized that we weren't live. I was like, I thought, oh god, I'm just crap. So this is where James lives at the moment, although he's not there.
Well, that's where I was, and now I'm in the center of Ukraine. So if you go all the way over, I'm in Cherkasy Oblast. So
is that where you've permanently moved?
Well, that's my wife's family lives there, and so we're here visiting for the holidays, for the new year and such. Yeah. So little village right in the middle, basically right where the dot in the I and the word Ukraine on the map is. That's you're pretty much there. If you zoom out and you see, you get the basic idea.
Yeah.
So
we don't want to get OPSEC here, mate. We don't want to knocking on your door.
It's really true. The missile fell a couple of weeks ago, about 40 kilometers from here, and this past week has been really hard for a lot of my friends and my students. I teach English here in Ukraine, in addition to running my YouTube channel and website. But I have one student outside of Kyiv. She went with her family for the holidays. She had a Russian missile fall about 300 meters from her house, for example. Wow. on Tuesday, so
and you can't communicate the feeling of these things, the experience of going through living in Kyiv and going through a big attack with air raid sirens and buildings exploding. It's not something you can easily communicate. It's something I guess you've got to experience, except please don't experience it because war sucks. But what I'll do now then, thank you for joining. You often do this. It's very kind of you to have someone to bounce off my ideas and also sort of field the comments, especially since at the moment I'm doing these later in the day, and Matt Bishop, who has helped me previously, is safely tucked up in bed in Australia. So that's the way the world works with its funny times. I think all humans should exist on GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, because Britain is the center of the universe.
Why
this
not?
Is a fact. It is just a fact. Oops! Now look what I've done. Right. Anyway, moving on to the map. This is what happens when I go off piste. I get myself in trouble. Right. As you can see there, and thank you to JR who's done the mapping. What an absolute legend. So there is not a lot of change to the map. There are still these claims, and I talked about this previously, that perhaps the Russians are gearing up to attack in the Kupiansk area. The Daily Telegraph reports that Russia is preparing to attack Kupiansk and its surroundings on January the 15th, indicated by recently increased large-scale missile attacks in the Kharkiv region. Russia may be planning to intensify such attacks from January the 7th onwards, which is tomorrow. The ISW has talked to this as well. But on the flip side, we have heard this a number of times previously. They have been supposedly accumulating forces for a large attack in this area for some time now. We've heard about the kind of 100,000 in Luhansk Oblast troops situation before. It hasn't amounted to anything so far other than these, albeit fairly, I guess, significant localized attacks. Sinkivka has been under a lot of pressure for some time now. Kupiansk as well, getting hammered by, and this whole area by different munitions and whatnot. Oh, why didn't you tell me I don't have the map? For goodness sake.
I was wondering, well, it was nice. I was enjoying just,
So right about a year ago, I did a live stream mapping update where I was on my own, and it had exactly this setup. And I was doing, and because I couldn't look at the comments because they're on a different screen, I did something like half an hour of mapping.
Oh,
and everyone in the live stream was going, I can't see the map. And then it became some joke, and then they're all having a laugh at my expense. And it was just an infamous, anyway, this is the northeastern sector, the axis whereby, where, there might be an accumulation of troops. That Sinkivka is, has been under a lot of pressure. And actually, in the ISW Institute for the Study of War, they do say Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces pushed the Ukrainian forces from positions in northern and central Sinkivka, and that Sinkivka is now a contested grey area. Although it does say then below, ISW has not observed any visual confirmation of these purported gains in Kupiansk or indeed Liman, as it goes on to say. So you do get these quite often where the Russians are claiming, we're in Sinkivka. I mean, we've actually had that previously. The Suryat maps, I think, for some time. I remember when Defmon was on Twitter, he seems to have disappeared. He had Sinkivka, I think, or at least partially under control of the Russians. So there have been those claims before. I don't think that's the case at the moment, but the Ukrainians really do need a lot more ammunition and supplies to defend right across the front line. It is a real challenge for them. And then as we go slightly further to the south, another mill blogger has claimed that Russian forces advanced to positions within 3 kilometers of Terny and Yampolivka, and stated that Russian forces are trying to eliminate the Ukrainian bridgehead on the right bank of the Jeret River in the area. And I talked exactly about this yesterday, so I will come back to that pin in a second. But just to say that here is the Jeret River. It goes from the Sversky Donetsk down there, all the way up there and up here, and it sort of joins the Russian front line where the Russians attacked in this Novoherivka area, just sort of southwest of Svatova. And that's where the Russians had some success in getting to that river and over it. And it looks like they are trying to get to the river down here with all these water features. And the claim is they're sort of 3 kilometers from Terny now. Well, at the moment, Surat Maps, the pro-Russian mapper, has them at 4.2 kilometers from the Jeret River. So that would ISW stating that other mill bloggers, Russian mill bloggers, claiming they're even closer. I suppose it could be this area here that might fit in. That's 3.7 kilometers. So anyway, differing claims that the Russians are having some success there. But we do have a pin from Andrew Perpetua further to the north in this area of Kislivka, where there was actually Yehidne, Ivanivka, where there has been quite a bit of fighting recently. Some catching up to the Suryat Maps line there for Andrew Perpetua. So that's broadly the northeastern axis. Is there anything that you want to add about the northeast? Is there any thoughts that you have?
I mean, just that I have friends who have been there, in the last several months, and just because the line's not moving, don't think that it's not serious, real fighting. Andrew Perpetua, I was listening to him today, and his headline was something like this again, because they're kind of repeating the same strategy that they had before last year. And I don't know if it's a conscious strategy down there in the lakes in the southern part of the line. Yeah, right there. Part of the problem might be that you've got some choke points for supply for the Ukrainians there, coming around or through those lakes. Yeah, and that could be giving kind of an advantage to the Russians, whether or not they are purposefully actively pushing in that area. That's I don't know if they're smart enough to do that, but that would be a natural disadvantage for the Ukrainians in this case.
Yeah, and this is the axis where the Ukrainians have generally put, I think, possibly could be the case further to the north, they're less experienced troops. So there were reports that troops have been positioned there without too much training earlier on in the war and whatnot. So yeah, that's it's just another nugget to throw in there. Then we come down to the Serebryansky forest, where the Russians have potentially made some more gains in a similar area to what we saw previously from Syriac maps, sort of minor gains there. But it is this idea that they are advancing in a number of different places. And, this is sometimes, and I'd be interested to see what you think, James, but sometimes I think, right, this isn't a problem. They can give up some land because this is a period of time when the Russians are on the attack, and actually the Ukrainians need to defend. And there's some people saying there's some analyses coming out now that say they don't have the ammunition or the weapons until they get it in, and that won't be till sort of 2025. So it could be that the whole year is a defensive stance where where they sit in defense. And I was listening to, I don't know if it was on Andrew Pepecha's live stream or someone else recently saying that actually the Ukrainians kind of want the Russians to keep attacking in the way they are, because actually by doing that, the Russians are attriting themselves.
Right.
It's like they're attriting more troops and equipment in attacking than they were when the Ukrainians were attacking. So if you're talking about this calculation, then actually it's much better for the Ukrainians to sit back, soak that up, and hit them with drones and artillery. And as long as they have enough artillery ammunition to sustain a decent defense, which is up for grabs, that's a claim, that's an issue. But if as long as they have that, then they can do a great deal of damage to the Russians while sitting in defense.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. The question has to be, if Ukraine got all the weapons that it needs, tomorrow, and was able to push the Russians all the way back to the edges of Luhansk, to the original, 1991 borders, would that stop the war? Or would Russia just keep say, okay, well, we're going to try again next year or in 3 years or 5 years? Unfortunately, I think it's possible that given the current state of Russia, until things get much, much worse socially, Russia has to collapse internally for them to stop. And the only way that that's going to happen is not if they take more territory, if Ukraine takes more territory necessarily. It's just if enough Russians die. Sadly enough, or enough veterans, Russian veterans, go back, like ex-POWs, go back to Russia and say, "Hey, this is crap. What are we doing? This is bullshit." Kind of a Vietnam scenario, that kind of a thing.
There's been talk about that before. That kind of morale, and it's interesting that there's talk. There are claims that the Russians don't let their own troops go back to Russia on rotation. So they basically, if you get time off during during rotations or whatever, if they actually do get to do rotations, then they invariably are sent behind the lines to areas of occupied Ukraine, because if they're worried that if they send them back to Russia, not only will they cause issues with morale and discontent in the Russian population, but actually they might not see those troops again. And so it's interesting the way that they try and dictate, the time off that they get, if indeed they get any. But what I was going to say to you, and I have said this before, but so okay, let's get to back where I was talking about before. So I get this sense that sometimes I think, okay, it doesn't matter if they cede territory to the Russians, as long as they are attriting at the required rates. But then I also just psychologically, you're going to feel that whenever the pins are the wrong colors and the map is moving in the Russian direction, I just get really frustrated and upset. And I get frustrated and upset because I then think, if the West really did want Ukraine to win, Ukraine could win like that. Like, I'm really positive that actually it's relatively easy for Ukraine to win. It just requires the will and the political will of all of the allies, and really of the US. The amount of weapons that the US could give Ukraine, they could, if they really, 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 really wanted Ukraine to prevail now across the political landscape in the US, then Ukraine could win relatively easily. And
I hate to
that
say
frustrates me.
this. I'm actually terrified to say this, but maybe we here in Ukraine, maybe we have to lose a little bit to wake up. Maybe we have to see the map shift in a big way in favor of Russia to make people, politicians, and the general public wake up and say, "Oh my God," in the same way that they did when the war first started.
I think that's really risky, because I think there's an element of the public who are already naysayers who would then go,
it's terrifying. It's
then
terrifying.
because they would then go, well, just give up. They're losing, so now let's do the peace.
That's right.
So that could go really the wrong way. I mean,
Sure.
it's just when you look at what Ukraine are doing with the really very constrained hand they have, when you look at what they've done in the last few days in terms of striking Crimea and striking Novorossiysk, and you think, goodness me, if you gave them another 500 cruise missiles,
Seriously,
they're just like, that's all it, 500
Seriously.
cruise missiles and some more airframes to do that, this war changes. So this isn't about it being unfair that Ukraine get more stuff than the Russians. Like, this is the moral argument's already happened. So it's like, Ukraine is in a car race with Russia, right? We need to make sure Ukraine wins that car race.
Yeah.
So let's not. Russia is driving in a 1986 Ford Escort. We need to give Ukraine a Bugatti Veyron. And just like, right, there you go. It's not fair. You've got a much better car than them, but who gives a damn? Those guys are the bad guys, and you need to win this race. So there's a Bugatti Veyron. Go for it, mate. But instead,
cross the word stalemate out of your mind. This is a race. It's just the two sides are both, driving Ford Festivas.
Yeah, and we are just giving them just enough fuel and just enough, power steering to get them neck and neck with the Russians at the moment. And right, it's just, but we've got a Bugatti Veyron sitting in a garage going, do you know what you could have? Do you know what you could have, mate? That car over there. But do you know what? You can't have it. Why? Because we're all arguing with each other. That's why you can't have it. We're all arguing with each other. But anyway, just to let you know, it is over there in the garage. Does that frustrate you? Yes, it does. Oh, well, and that frustrates me. Like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Anyway, those are I'm getting towards my rant mode, James. So I will retreat just a little bit from there. Right. Let's go back to the ISW. And as you can see, I've not highlighted an awful lot of text. There's none in the Bakhmut area, which is really significant, because I was feeling bad about Bakhmut, but it does seem to have stabilized somewhat. And I know it's tough fighting all along that front there, but it is, I think, really good news that the Ukrainians have stabilized. And I think they've had to, as I keep saying, Chasiv Yar is, they really need to keep a strong defensive line, a buffer between where they are now and Chasiv Yar, because if Chasiv Yar comes under direct attack, then that's a real worry. And it's also a worry for this whole area in the south. I mean, this is less important for me, the Klishchivka area, and I think that the Ukrainians really could give that up, and it wouldn't make too much of a difference as far as I'm concerned.
So I want to just point out something. First of all, I want to talk about a couple of your viewers here have asked or made some comments and asked some questions that I think really deserve addressing. First of all, Mashpot, I don't know if he's a troll or contrarian or whatever, but he said, ATP geopolitics, people like you are the reason the Russian population will never give up. They saw all the crazy stuff, people like you have said, Russians unhuman, break up Russia to small parts, etc. And I'd like to address that, because nobody was saying that until Russia started doing inhuman things and doing things that necessitate the breakup of Russia. So no, it's you got it the other way around, Mashpot. You guys brought it on yourselves. Now it's going to happen inevitably, but you're the the Russians made it happen. You had this fear and you projected your fear onto the world until such point as now people are saying, well, I guess this is what we have to do. So
it's a mixture of victim blaming. Not that I'm a victim, but in a very strangled way. You can argue that geopolitically we are all victims of what's going on. But it's also this kind of idea of post hoc rationalization. So what pro-Kremlin voices have to do. So post hoc rationalization means post hoc means after the fact rationalization. So right. This is really prevalent in philosophy, which is how people justify their opinions and their conclusions. So here a guy he's being paid to probably by the Kremlin to say, right, you need to go out and argue that what we're doing is a good thing. So they have to look at what's happened. They look at Russia's invaded, this has happened, that's happened, war crimes, people being shot in the head, prisoners being shot, and you've got to say, right, my job as a troll or as a pro-Kremlin voice or whatever, my job is to somehow make this good. How do I make this good? And it's quite a challenge. And you've got to say, right, you deserve it, or you caused it, or you go through all the different ways of post hoc rationalizing, like it's happened and I have to rationalize how that's a good thing. Right. And it's just a real uphill battle. And actually, if someone, it's like trying to justify genocide. If you, I've done this and I don't want to bring religion into this or anything, but if you are starting out with right, I need to justify genocide. Like if that's what your mental job is now, then dude, just give up. You're doing the wrong thing. Like if you are having to justify terrible things, you're the bad guy.
Well, you're talking about post hoc rationalization, and I think it's very closely related to what we spoke about right before our stream about how the theory of consciousness, which is that consciousness is emergent and constantly, essentially rationalizing things that our subconscious mind is doing, and this is that writ large into a society, I think.
So just as a bit of a sidebar, James and I had a bit of a chat before coming on live where I explained the position. I have actually said this to you before. Those who have watched all of my videos will have heard this before. There's a position called epiphenomenalism in philosophy. And epiphenomenalism is this idea that rather like when you boil a kettle, then the necessary byproduct of boiling a kettle is the steam that comes off. When your brain works, the machinations of your brain have a necessary byproduct of consciousness, but your consciousness isn't driving your brain. And when we are conscious, like I was talking to James about how when I do my videos, I'm almost listening to myself. Well, I don't know what words are going to come out. My brain throws these words out and I go, yeah, that was good, or yeah, that was bad, and I listen to myself, and that is epiphenomenalism. The idea that actually you're not riding the horse, as in you're not steering the horse is steering you, but you think you're steering the horse. So our consciousness is a reflection of the machinations of our brain, and then quite often we are post hoc rationalizing what we do. So our brain decides to do things, and then our consciousness goes, right, and now I need to attach some rationality to that and justification to that. And interestingly, I could bore you with loads of severing hemispheres of the brain and how actually we can see parts of that genuinely does happen, and there are experiments to show that is the case. Anyway, that's a bit of
yes. How about epiphenomenalism as a theory of sociology? That's what I'm.
yeah, and so goodness. So maybe Mashpot is just not quite that, but he's certainly having to justify that which has already happened, and it's an uphill battle, I think, when it's so obviously that the Russians have erred on the side of malevolence, in my opinion. Right, as we come further down to the south, we come to Avdiivka. So passing Shumi, and this area, by the way, in case you didn't see my last live stream, my last Frontline update, is receiving quite a lot of attention from aerial bombardments, and that could be, I just speculated, it could be because they pulled back using aviation so much to the south because they lost a few planes, and they pulled back their aviation from, these FOB KB guided glide bombs, pull back from dropping them in the Dnipro area, although I think they've restarted that now. So they could be giving attention to this area because it's literally safer for them to operate there rather than further to the south where they've lost a couple of planes. But again, pure speculation. Right, in the Avdiivka area, ISW says geolocated footage published on the 4th shows that Russian forces advanced north of Avdiivka near the coke plants and northwest of Avdiivka along the rail near Novobakhmativka. Russian mill bloggers claimed on the 5th that Russian forces also advanced 400 meters along the railway line north of the Tokmash Dacha area, northwest of Avdiivka, and 400 meters near the coke plants. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces northwest of Avdiivka near Berdichi advance on average 100 meters every 2 days. So let's put all of that onto the map. There are supposedly, according to some Russians, some 400-meter advances in certain areas around here, and that they are advancing 100 meters every 2 days in maybe this area. What is 100 meters? Well, let's have a look here. That is about 180 meters. So every 2 days, they're advancing something like that. A bit less than that, actually. So there you go. There, something like that every 2 days, which is not huge, but if it's consistent, and then perhaps advances up here. Any thoughts about this northern area of Avdiivka?
I mean, it comes down to a question of how many Russians per meter. That's the thing.
Yeah. It's all about the calculation. It's the ratio of losses.
Andre Perpetua and some others were talking about in this zone right here. They've been pushing forward to Stepova, and it looks like maybe I've just seen in some reports that they've been kind of held there a little bit, and now they're trying to push north and northwest to kind of get around that, to expand the line. And that kind of there's Novo Kalinova, kind of up in that, and it looks like they might be pushing up in that direction. They're just trying to take this salient and build it out as much as they can to prevent the cauldron effect is ultimately what they're trying to do here. Because if that salient sits there for too long, then Ukraine will, even with their shortage, they will pull in Novo on the north side of that salient. You can imagine, they're trying to create a cauldron in Avdiivka, but Ukraine can create a cauldron on one side or the other as well. So they have to expand that out.
So the geolocated evidence for Russian advances in the area are various. I'll just pick out a few of these. Here it says that the Ukrainians are hitting the Russians with drones. I can't do the translation there because unfortunately it messes with the I hate it when that happens. I think it's the use of Telegram on the browser means that Google Earth has a few issues every now and again, and I had to refresh it. So sorry about that. Anyway, this is the Bakhmut area. Goodness me, it looks very different without the lines on it. So I was going to do some geolocations to that, but unfortunately you'll just have to wait for that and have some polite conversation. There we go. We're back. Okay, so let's geolocate some of these Russian troops that are being hit by Ukrainian drones. And that's interesting. So that would suggest some advances along the line towards a coke plant. This is very much a grey zone there, although it doesn't necessarily mean that's where the Russian defensive line needs to be pushed, because these will signify advances possibly from the Russians into that grey zone, which you'd expect if they were attacking, which they are. So it doesn't necessarily mean that just because Russians are there that you have to move the Russian defensive line. This is a criticism that Andrew Perpetuous had previously about Suriyat maps. So what he claims Suriyat maps does, and there's another geolocation there in those datches just by the water treatment plant. He claims that Suriyat map sees a Russian troop. It just has to be one single Russian soldier, and he goes, right, the Russians control that area, and of course that doesn't necessarily mean that at all. It means it's very difficult to move your lines and know exactly where they are, because you're never quite sure whether that's just an attack, whether there's actual like control over that over a consistent time period, so on and so forth. So you can see there's Russians all around here. Further geolocated source here says active hostilities in a northern envelopment of Avdiivka, attack of the armed forces of Ukraine by infantry unit in a direction of the position the armed forces of the Russian Federation near the railway line in Jeret. Contact shooting battle position of the Supreme Court. So I think that's a weird translation there. I don't think the Russian Supreme Court is going to be active around the Avdiivka front line, but you never know. Maybe they're looking into war crimes. So here we have activity in that tree line on the very edge of the salient to the north. So geolocations are generally confirming what we have, I think. The last one, positional combat operations, again in the northern envelopment. The forward position of the Russian armed forces near the railway line, again it's going to be a similar geolocation to the one we've just seen. Let's see where this shows the Russians. In a similar place there. So I think the mapping in Avdiivka seems to be fairly on point with regard to what the geolocations show us.
And that, that little road that you zoomed in on there, that fits with what some people are saying about the Russians, going towards that northwestern direction.
The railway line here,
yeah. It's a road to go along. It can offer some level of protection if it's on a little bit of a rise or something like that. And so it makes a lot of sense.
And they're having more success moving that direction than they are moving towards Bedici from the east. So Stepover, the Ukrainians have really done a good job of stabilizing the Stepover area. They use quite a few Bradleys there to some decent effect, so that's all good news. Other than that, there literally there are no other changes to the front line, as according to the three mapping sources. So Deep State Map, Suriyat Maps, and Andrew Perpetua have no changes to the front line. So that is really the mapping update, which is good news for the Ukrainians, because we had a period where, and I'm just flicking through the Institute for the Study of War, nothing around Novomykhailivka really. I mean, there is still activity, of course, but just a lot less of it. I mean, look, that is the Robotino Novoprokopivka paragraph. I mean, that used to be like 2-3 paragraphs long and all sorts of claims being thrown in there, and now we've just got positional fighting continued, and that's all it says essentially. So really that's good news for the Ukrainians, because it was looking slightly worrying that the Russians were pushing back everywhere, but my sense is that they just don't have that much in the tank in terms of troops, resources, artillery ammunition, artillery pieces to support combined arms maneuvers, and I think they've pretty much already culminated. And we don't want to use a stalemate term particularly, because there is an awful lot still going on in different contexts, but both sides I think are exhausted in terms of being able to commit to large offensives, and that just goes to show, I think, what a damn good job Ukraine have done. And I'm not just trying to like cheerlead for Ukraine here. Like, we're talking about fighting against the second biggest army in the world that have overwhelming equipment and personnel advantages in terms of numbers, and the Ukrainians have been able to use some decent weaponry quite effectively, or very effectively really, to stop the Russians and attrit them at a rate that means that they are stalling in many places on the front line. Now, that's not to mean that they can't accumulate forces and push again and so on and so forth, but this is not as I saw the momentum really shifting a couple of weeks ago, and I was genuinely fairly worried. And it could still go again. There are lots of talks about Ukrainian forces being low on equipment and ammunition and really struggling. So you might get breakthroughs again. But I think generally speaking, the Ukrainians have done a really good job to stabilize the front line. Sorry, it's a lot of me talking, James. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so we're going to be in this place of positional warfare for the remainder of the winter. Until we see Mike, I think until we see Mike Johnson leave office. That's I don't think he's going to be speaker for very long, to be honest with you. I think once
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. It's not gonna work out for them. I would like to say that, I'm not, I think I'm not just purely rah cheerleading for the Ukraine side and the Ukrainian army. I do recognize that there are problems, and this is a time when the Ukrainian army, I think, in general, is going to and needs to kind of look back and say, okay, what are these problems? Kind of a analyzing, plan, do, study, act, and this is or plan, do, check, act. And this is a time when, while they're holding off the Russian advances and, just a meat grinder for the Russians, they can, assess what are their next moves going to be. When we do get the weapons, when we do get the funding, what are we going to do with it? I think this is an ideal time to get more officer training in place for the Ukrainians. That's probably the biggest thing that they need to do internally right now, is get their officers, get experienced guys moved up into officer positions, and train the officers that they do have better. And if they can do that, see, that's the thing, is because we are attriting the Russians so much, we want to kill them faster than they can learn, just to be perfectly honest about it. The ones who live and don't become prisoners of war, the ones who survive the next day, I mean, yes, Ukraine learns better than Russia. Russia is not a learning society, and the Russian army is not a learning organization. But even despite that, humans have that capability, and we have to be very careful not to give them the chance. It's a little bit like when you have a bacterial infection. If you don't take your full round of antibiotics, that bacteria infection can come back worse.
Yeah. I mean, there's goodness me, there's so much to say. I mean, I wanted to talk about an awful lot of things in my extra that I'm not going to do. So I'm going to be combining a bit of my extra today with this frontline update, especially since there's not too much to report again from the front line. And I want to come back to this idea that you were just talking about then. Before I do that, the last bit I want to say was on Krynky. Ukrainian forces maintain positions on the east or the left bank of the Kherson Oblast as of the 5th, but there were no changes to the front line. The Ukrainian General Staff reported Ukrainian forces repelled 10 Russian assaults on the east bank. A Russian Mail blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces continued to transfer reinforcements to positions near Krynky, and that Russian forces have become more effective at operating within range of Ukrainian electronic warfare systems in the area. So there's a bit of adaptation possibly going on there for the Russians, but the Ukrainians have had some electronic warfare advantage and drone advantage in this area. The Birds of Madhya and other units are exacting quite a toll on the Russians in the Krynky area, so that they have lost, depending on who you listen to, various, there's a range of equipment that they've lost, anywhere from sort of 60 is the bare minimum geolocated confirmed losses, but other people saying as much as 200 pieces or maybe even more in this area, which is pretty phenomenal.
It's crazy. It's just it's a little tiny little nodule there, the Krynky there, but at this point it's symbolically important, and I think it's absolutely the case, as has been said, that right now, Ukraine realized that, hey, we're not going to get the international support we needed, so we can't make this bridgehead anymore, any bigger. So what are we going to do with it? Well, let's use this as bait, and let the Russians bring 40,000, 70,000 guys here, and it will be the new Bakhmut.
Yeah, this is exactly what I've been saying recently, which is it sounds harsh for the actual Ukrainian troops being used in this way. They are being used instrumentally, you could argue, but from a kind of macro position, it's like, right, if we can maintain this small bridgehead here, even though we don't really have realistic hopes of expanding it, not without a change in like equipment and this and that, and especially with artillery ammunition shortages. But if we can keep the people there, we know that's really annoying the Russians, and they are piling in their troops and mechanized equipment to try and push the Ukrainians from that bridgehead. And in so doing, they are putting themselves in harm's way, because all around here, you got the birds of Magyar doing their thing. You've got other drone units absolutely hammering.
And the left bank, or the north bank, I'm sorry, the right bank, which is the north bank of the river, is slightly higher. And
yes,
that small amount of elevation makes a difference.
Yeah, and so as a result, the Ukrainians are able to just cause quite a lot of pain to the Russians in this particular area. So just looking back across there is a bit of a rise to that river on the other side. You can see it just there. It just gives them a bit of an advantage looking over to the east bank, and of course that's why the east, the Russian occupied area, suffered so much more in the destruction of the Novokakhovka Dam, because actually it was higher on this side and protected the west bank, or the right bank, from so much of the issues there. But anyway, that's my thoughts about Krynky. Not really having changed my thoughts there at all. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I just want to go back just a little bit, because I forgot to mention, we had a guy a couple of weeks ago in our chats, Orses, and I know you were kind of not sure if he was the real deal. I'm like 95% on that. Okay, he was in Klashivka. He got injured, and he's in a hospital in Chasiv Yar, last I heard. He did get in touch with me and let me know he's doing okay. I have to say, I know he was
just on that point. Sorry to interrupt, but it's really difficult when someone comes onto a live chat like that, and I want to be as supportive as possible. If that was, exactly who he was, fighting there and chipping in, like, goodness me, that's incredible, and props to you, of course. But then there's part of me, like, I have no idea,
right?
And
it could be a Russian troll tactic to come in and say, "Oh, everything's horrible." Exactly. The thing that I would say is, if your infantry are not complaining, you're doing something wrong. That's just I think that should just be a maxim of war. I think Sun Tzu said that. Basically, if you're on the front line and you're like enjoying your life, like, something's wrong. So it doesn't surprise me at all that he could have been winning. I mean, sometimes they were, but it was still hard. And they got pressed pretty hard in Klashivka, but Ukraine also fought back and had some real success there, and I think in no small measure because that international unit was able to hold the Russians in front of the lakes and whatnot. And I'm going to continue to have discussions with Orsis, and I have people who will talk to people and make sure that we verify all of that.
Absolutely. And it sounded like pretty incredible what he was going through and what was happening there. So
to me, that just sounded like normal every day from most of the guys who've been out there. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds about right. Normalna, as we would say here.
So one other thing I wanted to, there's a number of other things I wanted to talk about. Anton Gerashchenko here describing what's been going on in Crimea with the Yevpatoria area with the strikes. So just to give you a bit more information about that, Ukrainian Air Force is carrying out methodical work aimed at destroying the occupiers' control system in Crimea. And this is where I've talked previously about how I think the Ukrainians are doing a better job of methodical destruction of Russian air defenses and all of the equipment required, so radar systems, command and control nodes involved in that, in a way that the Russians really didn't do effectively at the beginning of the war, and they're now, you sow what you reap what you sow, and at the moment they are in a bit of a bind in this whole war because they didn't think it was a war. I know I've said this a million times, but they didn't plan on it being a war. And because they didn't plan on it being a war, they planned on it being a special military operation where they could just get rid of the government. And that didn't happen. Within 3 days, they knew they're in a war accidentally. So they hadn't really done the suppression of enemy air defenses that you would normally do if you were planning for a war. If you're planning for a war, you would do a month, 6 weeks, 2 months of SEAD and destruction of enemy air defenses, to the point where you had complete air superiority, and then you go in and do your combined arms maneuvers and whatever. They didn't do that, and now they're ruining that. Well, the Ukrainians are going about doing that in places like Crimea, particularly at the moment. And Anton Gerashchenko talks to this. Over the past few days, the Air Force of the Ukrainian Armed Forces has carried out a number of successful attacks on enemy targets and still occupy Crimea. After a series of strikes near Sevastopol and Yevpatoria, on the 4th, another effective attack was carried out on the airfield near Saki on the night of the 5th and 6th. This attack targeted the command post at the airfield, as reported by Air Force Commander Mykola Oleschuk. So he released this picture this morning, which is a picture before the strike, and one would assume he's later going to, waiting for the Russian trolls to go, oh, nothing's happened, and then release a picture afterwards, is what I'm guessing. At least one Russian serviceman was wounded in the attack. One was under the rubble in the morning of January the 6th, according to Astra. Saki is a first-class military airfield in Crimea, which hosts the Nikita training complex for training deck aviation flight crews, or the NITKA. The operator of the airfield is the Russian Ministry of Defense. Since 2014, the 43rd Independent Marine Attack Aviation Regiment has been stationed at the airfield, flying Su-24M and Su-30S SM aircraft. It is a protected command post located in the north of the airfield and deep underground. So there was talk this morning about a bunker being hit there. But this is not a problem for the Storm Shadow Scalp cruiser missile, as these missiles are designed to hit such highly protected targets. I talked about the broach warhead, which is a two-part mechanism that explodes and then gets the warhead further into whatever it's attacking, and then that next part explodes. So it's a bunker buster, basically. So owing to the tandem warhead, the cumulative charge first creates an opening in the obstacle, and then a high explosive warhead goes in. The Russian Ministry of Defense reported on the night of January the 6th, Russian air defense systems shot down 4 aviation-guided missiles over annexed Crimea. Of course, they always report that, and there's never any kind of real evidence of that. The Russian Defense Ministry blamed Ukraine for the attack. Well, of course, no other details were provided by the ministry. So I think what we're seeing in Crimea and Novorossiysk is just, not so much shaping operations, but they are really working hard to take out. We've seen S-300s and S-400 stations, batteries being taken out on the western side of Crimea. They're working really hard to degrade the Russian ability to defend Crimea from strikes. And then it goes back to what we were saying, James, that you give 500 cruise missiles to Ukraine, gee whiz, what they could achieve would be phenomenal.
I was just listening today. Covert Cabal had a video that just came out about how many missiles would it take for Russia to defeat Ukraine. It was like a, 10 or 20 minute long video, and it basically came out that there aren't enough missiles. Even the United States doesn't have enough missiles to defeat Ukraine. But the flip side of that is that, Ukraine may not have them right now, but could easily get enough missiles to drive Russia out of the occupied territories, out of Crimea and out of the Donbass. No doubt.
That's so true. I mean, just look at the comparative sizes, right? And actually, they've already degraded an awful lot of the Russian, logistics, command nodes and whatever, air defense systems and this and that in the occupied regions. And so, it would just, 1,000 HIMARS, 500 cruise missiles, and then 500 ATACMS, and then suddenly things are different. And that's not that. If you think about the whole cost of wars and whatnot, this is not mental. It's like, here are 500 cruise missiles, here are 500 ATACMS or 1,000 ATACMS, and here are 1,000, 2,000 HIMARS missiles. That's not a crazy amount of aid to give Ukraine. Go and see what you can do with them. Go and play. My goodness, things would look different. And again, it goes back to my frustration that it is relatively easy to allow to facilitate Ukraine prevailing in this conflict in a way that we're just not doing, and it really annoys me.
I just noticed the Russian trolls in our chat have gone to my my Shopify website. It's funny, they're talking about it in the chat.
So
thanks for going to my Shopify website, trolls.
I wanted to say, Potato Gunman has said this: the pay trolls are dominating 99% of the pro-Russian channels. This is interesting. When you go to places like Military Summary and places like that, and Weeb Union, and what's his name? Asia Defense Politics.
Oh yeah, Weeb Union, all of that.
Yeah, DPA.
There's several others. I'm going to do a whole live stream about those guys.
The threads are just entirely trolls, and they are just part of it, making the narratives look normal on the pro-Ukrainian channels. They are just trying to disturb. And indeed, Mashpot here says the Russians, and this is typical nonsense, the Russians give, and people that put lol at the end, haha, because war is hilarious. The Russian gave Ukraine 9 years to stop attacking Donbass. Lol. 9 years not enough, right? That's like me going round to my neighbor's house, smashing up my neighbor's house, and then saying, and then like occupying my neighbor's house for the last 9 years, and then saying to my neighbor, I've given you 9 years not to defend against me. Like, what? Hang on, you're the one that's what utter nonsense. That is an illegal invasion. It took place from 2014 onwards. Little green men, that kind of stuff is just pure Russian propagandistic shite. And so, good riddance to you, young man. Anyway, so something I just flashed up on the screen, and I'm going to spend some time looking at this in more depth in an extra, but this is some interesting statistics about the missiles that have been shot and how successful the Ukrainians have been in taking them out. And so we have these sort of KH-101, 555s, 55s, where 90% of them have been taken out. Caliber, 71% of them being taken out. And we're seeing fewer of these being sent recently because the Ukrainians are so good at shooting them down. We've got 0% of these KH-22s and 32s and these Onyx anti-ship missiles, and that's because basically they get fired generally from a lot shorter. With the Onyx, they get fired at a lot shorter range, I believe, and they're close to the water, and then they cause a lot of trouble, or they have semi-ballistic trajectories where they're much more difficult to hit. I think that's the issue with the KH-22 and 32s.
That's the X-22 is ballistic, and it's just much more difficult to hit. Exactly.
Yeah, and so
luckily they don't have an endless supply of those KH-22s. So that, but yeah, it's pretty much what do you
and that's, but unfortunately they do have a lot of these S-300, S-400. So these are the surface-to-air missile system missiles that are used traditionally to attack aircraft, but they can be used in a secondary mode, but they are more inaccurate. But they're also, because they take a ballistic trajectory, Ukrainians have shot 3% of them down. So that is not a good return there, and that is just good. And the Iskander-M as well. So Kinzhals, interestingly, have a higher interception rate than those other missiles, than the Iskander-M, and yet they're cost an absolute arm and a leg, and are supposed to be all singing, all dancing, indestructible. You can't defend against them. Actually, Patriot systems have done a pretty good job of defending against Kinzhals, and so.
And is this? I didn't see at the beginning. Is this for the entire war? Does it say?
Yes, from January 2023.
Oh, 2023.
So it's not the whole war, but I think it's since they've been really counting stuff up more.
Because I just think that these numbers are going to change. So if we look at this chart in a year and we see 2024 to 2020, we're going to see these interception rates go up for some of them.
Yes, so it is. What's interesting is the interception rate for Shaheeds here is 81%, and actually that's changed over time. But if you looked at the last, well, it depends actually, because they're starting to be a bit funky with some of the Shaheeds and starting to use them. I reported recently they were using them on the front line in places like Kherson, where they were getting 0% interception or like close to, because actually they didn't have the air defenses there to tackle that because they weren't expecting that. But generally speaking, if you're going to fire stuff against Kyiv, for example, like 100% of stuff appears to be getting shot down at the moment. So more recently, the Shahed drones have had like 90% plus interception rates, whereas at the beginning of the war, it was far less than that. And so, yeah, it was really interesting. It will be interesting to compare different eras of the war and what the stats would be. And the last thing before we go on to talk about drones and then your stuff that you're doing at the moment, I just wanted to pop into a foreign policy article written by Jack Detch here. So if you bear with me in reading through this. So I'm just going to do a bit of reading and we'll have a chat about this. So this is the idea that the Pentagon is trying to rebuild the arsenal of democracy, which is to say that the industrial military base in the US is suddenly getting tequila in its eyeballs and it's getting some serious Class A drugs mainlined into it. So that it's like, okay. So what's it say? It's like an electrocardiogram of the US defense industry. There's a line going up to count the number of units moved and a line going sideways for the time that it took to move them. There are production rates for the Patriot missiles that the US has sent to the Middle East to provide backup for Israel, the Sea Launch Standard Missile 6 that the US has deployed to the Indo-Pacific to potentially bloody China's nose if it launches an assault on Taiwan, and the guided multiple launch rockets known as Gimlers that helped the Ukrainians liberate Kherson and the areas around Kharkiv in a 1-2 punch to the Russian army in 2022. And even though business is booming, Defense Department officials are facing a problem from hell. How can the Pentagon mobilize the US defense industry to respond to not just one conflict or two, but potentially 3 wars? So this is possibly also like exacerbated by, this is me talking now, a carrier group, I think, being sent out to the Philippines to defend, to be a deterrence against China concerning the Philippines and some issues out there. There's all sorts of stuff going on around the world at the moment that is not looking good. You've got South Korea, North Korea having a little poke at each other. But anyway, foreign policy talked to a dozen defense ministers, officials, and experts across the NATO alliance. They described an almost Sisyphean task to rebuild the transatlantic and trans-Pacific defense industrial base to fight 3 wars, not during a world war, but when much of the Western world is at peace. Sisyphus, by the way, is the person that was in Greek mythology was tasked with pushing a big boulder up a hill, only for it to fall back down again, and having to do that and doing that over and over and over. Quote: "We are moving from a just-in-time, just-enough economy model to a peak demand model." So it's not that you can give just enough stuff for Ukraine to keep neck and neck with Russia. We need to be producing, or the US needs to be producing a shed load of stuff that's more than enough to be able to compensate for potential wars and conflicts around the world, etc., etc. Said Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, the chairman of NATO's military committee, in an interview in his office at the Alliance's Brussels headquarters in October. Much like the manner in which the Western world had to convert factories at dizzying speed to produce protective medical equipment during the COVID-19 pandemic, Western leaders need to, quote, make sure everybody understands the sense of urgency of where we are. I don't think there's enough people. There are certain people like you and I and people in geopolitical analysis around the world who are like, this is nuts. We need to be waking up. But there's not enough people in the general public to realize how precarious the world is at the moment and how on a knife edge we are in terms of Israel, Gaza, in terms of Iran, in terms of Russia and China, in terms of the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan and the Philippines and North Korea and South Korea and Venezuela and Guyana and etc., etc. This is a real challenge. And then you've got Africa and the Sahel and the Russia's input there, and 9 coups that we've had in that region recently. It's just It's all going off.
These things are not random at all.
No.
I mean, in each of these things, we can, even in the Republican politics in the United States, we can see the hand of Russia working. I think it's very telling that Venezuela, it's ally of Russia. Where are they getting these ideas? Well, probably Russia came to them and said, "Hey, could you help us out here? Could you start a little war to distract America for a little bit?" The same thing with the Houthis with Iran. Iran is allied and Palestine, right? So Iran is allied with Russia. Russia came to Iran and said, "Hey, could you just we'll give you a little something? Could you stir up some trouble? Just stir the pot, just kind of make things go crazy because we just want to take attention off the real war. Hey, North Korea, could you fire 250 shells into the ocean near South Korea? Could you do that for us? Just help us out a little bit because we need people looking the other way while we do this in Ukraine. That's what's going on.
To continue, now Washington is trying to get back in business after 3 decades of post-Cold War belt tightening that saw companies merge the production line slow down. LaPlante said that the Pentagon has built a facility in Texas that has a capacity to surge 155mm artillery shells as needed. Boeing is growing its capacity to build sensors for Patriot missiles in its Huntsville, Alabama facility by nearly a third. In Europe, Bulgaria and Czech Republic are becoming major producers of ammunition. Germany is buying hundreds of millions of dollars worth of artillery shells, while Rheinmetall sets up shop inside Ukraine. Sweden, Denmark and Norway have begun jointly procuring 155mm barrels for Ukraine, and the Swedish manufacturer Saab, which no longer makes cars, is producing so many diesel-electric submarine hulls that it isn't even looking at Southeast Asia as potential. That's even looking at Southeast Asia as potential clients. Building industrial muscle.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and so much is actually going on behind the line. So there are so many people that say Europe aren't doing enough, and America's X, Y, and Z. And actually, the reality is that it takes a long time to get production going in the defense military industrial complex, and they need to be guaranteed contracts that go on for long enough to make it financially worthwhile to set up these production lines and ramp them up and so on and so forth. But it is happening, and it is hopefully going to gather momentum. But here's me trying to argue that we really need to be ramping up military industrial complex, and it's not something I ever would have said 10 years ago.
I mean, yeah, for me, I'm the same. And look at the German Green Party.
Yeah.
For example, they're traditionally, against the military industrial complex. I protested even as my brothers, my literal brothers, were in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was protesting against that war from before day one. The largest protests ever in American history.
Same in the UK, they stopped the war for the Iraq War. I mean, yeah, goodness me, that's a whole can of worms.
And it's not that I'm against war. It's not that those of us who are on that side of things are against war per se. We're against stupid wars. This
is a war of necessity. Yeah.
This is completely different. In many ways, that war is what led us to the place we are now.
So that it continues. Building industrial muscle means that the Pentagon needs to rebuild long atrophied bureaucratic muscle too. LaPlante has deputized the so-called Joint Production Cell, while within the Pentagon, comprising defense officials who are visiting production floors. So again, this is the stuff that's going on behind closed doors, where the Pentagon officials are visiting all sorts of production facilities around the US, going, right, are you on for this production? What are you looking for in terms of targets? There is just stuff happening. We might complain a lot here and there, but people are working behind the scenes. It's not just the question of getting scientists and dollars, but also of getting factories full of skilled workers, welders, assemblers, and foremen. So yeah, you can't just suddenly, if you're going to ramp up production, you can't just suddenly generate out of thin air hundreds of skilled workers that know what they're doing in those factories. It's just not. It's not like that. It's not like putting an order into Amazon for an extra 20 of these things. That's not how it works. So as LaPlante says, it's dusting off off a lot of skills that we've had in this country that we haven't used in a while. And later on it says, when it comes to putting shells in barrels since December 2022, the US industrial base has doubled its output of 155 mil ammunition, growing from 14,000 rounds a month to 28,000 or to 38,000. Between those two figures, LePont said US Army officials hope to get 60,000 rounds a month by September 2024, and to the magic number of 100,000 rounds a month by the end of 2025. European Union is producing between 600,000 and 700,000 artillery shells a year. Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur told reporters in November, well short of the 27-nation bloc's 1 million shell goal, which it hopes to reach next year. Now, another thing I just want to say is that too many people have a go. We love to just criticize, right? So it's like the EU said we're going to produce 1 million shells for Ukraine in a year. And what people then were on about is like looking at the EU, go, you haven't done it. You haven't done it. What a bunch of losers. You haven't done it. Rather than going, do you know what? Well done for actually pledging to give 1 million rounds to because if they hadn't pledged that, no one would be complaining to them about not reaching it. At least they bloody pledged that, and they are trying to work really hard. And if they don't reach that, it's not for want of trying. Now, you could argue that they could do more, that things happen, but it's so difficult to get out to wake this sleeping giant of a defense military industrial complex between 27 nations as well to get that done. So I'm going to be a bit more optimistic here and say, well done for pledging this, and well done for improving it. Yeah, you might not reach 1 million, but I tell you what, if it's 700,000, that's going to be useful. And if you are going to reach 1 million the year after, then hey, that's better than it was. So I don't know. Anyway, to support Ukraine and recapitalize its own stockpiles, Europe will have to reach about 3 million rounds per year in the next 10 years, Pevka said. So that's interesting, but that's where it looks like it is going.
What's very interesting is that, both Hungary and Slovakia have, sworn they're not going to give arms to Ukraine, but they are working very closely with Rheinmetall to produce shells and arms that will be sent to Ukraine.
Well, I think they've got contracts from their own indigenous manufacturers, not even Rheinmetall. I think like some of their own plants are just,
right. Yeah. But I guess they're subcontracted with Rheinmetall or something like that. But yeah, basically money talks.
Yeah, exactly. And so the political leaders can say one thing, but if you're Viktor Orban, you say, yeah, Ukraine sucks and I love Russia, and then his economy minister comes to him and says, by the way, do you fancy making $10 billion this year for the country in making 155 mil shells for Ukraine? He's like, yeah, but don't tell anyone we're doing that. So it's talking out both sides of your mouth, and that will then please Putin in Russia for saying the right things, but at the end of the day, you're still supplying a load of arms to Ukraine because that pays the tax dollars, and also you're in NATO as well, so you need to be towing the party line to some degree at least. I was wondering if we can just, before as we ramble towards the end, just go to talk about drones and then the stuff that you're doing. So there was just a comment. I like to flag up comments that I think are worthy and well thought out and just interesting from my viewers. So thank you very much for Joel UFO McG. I don't know if this is actual the handle there because in YouTube Studio it changes it. A few observations on the drone aspect. I would agree that Ukraine has a frontline drone advantage for reasons outlined below, but Russia undoubtedly has a numerical advantage in regard to long-range Shahed drones, and it appears to me that Russia is improving its tactics in the use of those. Although numerically disadvantaged, Ukraine makes better tactical use of what they do have. I definitely agree with that. In regard to quality of drone operators, while there is no evidence either way whether Russian training is better or worse than Ukrainian training, I think it is dangerous to assume that it is worse, although looking at other aspects of quality of Russian military training in general, it is reasonable to make the assumption it is likely to be worse, but assumptions are not facts. Now, this is a criticism of me, and I take that on board. So I said I think the training is better for Ukrainian drone pilots because I've seen evidence of them having an organized training program that the government has certificated and that lots of private companies are providing for the Ukrainian government. I haven't seen evidence of that for Russia, and I've also got evidence that some other things they do are just wholly corrupt in the military, and also just not as good. So it is an assumption, it is speculation that I think Ukrainian drone operators are better trained than Russians. But I do take on board this criticism, definitely, that it was something of an assumption, but it was an assumption based on a few bits underneath that. But yeah, point taken. Just carry on.
Yeah, I just think what we're seeing here, I think to some degree, is the emergence of two different systems. You have Ukraine, I would argue, is developing more closer to the Silicon Valley model of innovation, which is much more distributed, government incentivized, but privately funded, publicly funded. When I say Silicon Valley, I'm not talking about the modern day Silicon Valley of giant corporations and everything, but the old school Silicon Valley of the 1970s, 80s, 90s even. So it's a much more distributed, Sun Tzu said, if I may paraphrase, the height of military defense is to have no perceptible form. So because if the enemy cannot perceive you, then he cannot plan against it. That's basically. So that's the thing. If you have a bunch of huge factories making tanks, those are massive targets. But if you have drones being built in every home and garage and workshop and every extra little building space all over the country in a million different places, that's extremely difficult to fight against. Russia recently put out, I was just watching in the news today, Russia put out a notice that said that they would be, private citizens would be incentivized to manufacture as much as 32,000 drones per year.
Yeah, I reported on that this morning. Yeah.
Well, that was you. That was where I saw it.
Yeah.
Well, that shows you that they are trying to do it, but they don't have that culture. And if they did have that culture of innovation, that distributed culture of innovation, they're moving away from it. They're moving into the fascist scheme of nationalizing corporations and corporations working basically lockstep with government, and it's all centralized and all centrally controlled. That's the direction that they're going, and so we're going to see these two cultures, these two economies, diverge and emerge through this drone thing, and we'll see which one wins in the end. You know where I stand.
I recall an article from several months ago. He continues about a Russian recruitment campaign to attract online gamers for drone training, but I have no information about how successful or effective that campaign was or is. At the front line, Ukraine's advantage is not simply numerical or due to better training, both or neither of which might be true. The main factor in the relative success of Ukrainian drone operations over the Russians is due to a very large extent to Ukrainian tactics targeting especially Russian air defense and ECM assets, while enhancing their own similar assets. Russian drones are more likely to be subject to interference or being shot down. Regarding the imbalance of mechanized unit hits, you also need to consider that there are more Russian targets available to be hit, absolutely, and Russian tactics create more opportunities to hit their vehicles. So I'd agree with that synopsis, broadly speaking, and I still question this claim that Russians are making 300,000 drones a month. And as I said this morning, so I was pulled up on that by someone that said, well, the evidence of the Ukrainians hitting more units with their drones doesn't necessarily mean that the Russians don't have more drones, because the Russians could be hitting other things than units and infantry. And then Andrew Perpetua, and that was as a result of Andrew Perpetua coming out saying the Russians are using loads of drones to hit bunkers and dugouts and trenches. And so if they're overwhelmingly using their drones to do that, they might have a load more drones than the Ukrainians. It's just that they aren't hitting the vehicles because the Ukrainians aren't using the vehicles in the same way as the Russians. They aren't as easy to hit, so they are hitting bunkers and trenches, and that is a really good point. However, it still doesn't, I think, go towards explaining or justifying 300,000 drones being made a month. And also, as I said this morning, the Russian government is saying we are going to get the Russian population to produce 32,000 drones annually for the army by the year 2030. I mean, it's a weird thing because you're expecting to still be at war in 2030, but it also tells you that they aren't producing 300,000 drones a month, because if they were, they wouldn't need to go to their own population to say, can you please build us drones? Because 300,000 is clearly going to be enough to operate successfully on the front line. So I just don't believe that number.
No. China is producing 300,000 drones a month and shipping them in white trucks to Russia through Kazakhstan. That's what's happening.
Well, yeah. I mean, the whole China thing is a real issue.
It's a big hole. It's a big hole.
On the drone situation, or the drone topic, you have some expertise in networking, haven't you?
Sure.
And
sure.
I was talking the other week or the other day about the issues of having drones try and hit Novorossiysk, and the naval drones going to hit targets all the way over here. Can you have a signal that goes all the way from the coastline near Odessa to a naval drone here just outside Novorossiysk, or would you need relay stations like other drones to relay that drone, and you have basically a line of drones all the way back to the coastline that allows you to control them? But what are your thoughts on that? Can you give us some of your expertise?
Yeah. So, I mean, the answer is yes. Of course you can. I mean, I've personally set up like Wi-Fi, like Wi-Fi Ethernet, like you would have in your home. Okay, yeah. But that's extended for 96 miles. I think that's 145 kilometers. Okay, with one Wi-Fi antenna communication. Okay, antennas at both ends. All right, so it's very doable. But obviously, if you're using other signaling types, microwaves or whatever, you can go even longer, even farther. But the problem is that it's not sending the signal from Odessa or wherever it is. It's the drone sending communications back. So you can send a signal to that drone saying, go here, go there. But the drone needs to send a signal back to verify, saying, okay, I'm here. Now what do I do?
Right.
I'm here. Things look different than they said they were going to. What do I do now? Those are the kind of questions that the drone needs to ask. So that's why the relays are important, because if you want to have a high-powered antenna on your drone, you got to have a lot of power. So you're trading the range of the drone, which also requires power. You're trading the range of the drone for range of communication. So there's a kind of a sweet spot, a balance there, depending on different fuels you're using, what kind of batteries you're using. If you could even potentially use just solid fuel or liquid fuel and a generator. That's how a lot of rockets work. Ballistic missiles and things. That's how they are able to maintain communications over a long period. But drones aren't really able to do that. So that's when relays come into play, and that's where when I've spoken before about the existing cellular network and a cellular network really in the occupied territories, not of Crimea so much, but Kherson and Zaporizhia occupied territories. I would not doubt that in at least some of those occupied territories, some of that existing cellular network is operational and it is being used in the same sense, in the same way that Russia, at least since last May, had hacked into Kyivstar and had been, futzing around all over the Kyivstar network, testing out ways to allow their drones to use the Kyivstar network in Ukrainian territory. Well, the Kyivstar network also potentially, and the Vodafone network more especially, extends into the occupied territories of Kherson and Zaporizhia. And the Russians are using that to communicate. That's how the Ukrainian government is picking up all of these Russian cell phone signals and tracking them down and doing all of that stuff. Because and you may not know this, but also Novoposhta in some cases is actually still working behind the lines. It's possible in some cases, in some places, to actually send mail into the occupied territories. That has happened where people have been sending relief supplies in to their friends and relatives in the occupied territory. So it's somewhat ironic. So that's what's now the U.S. model is they have all their own military satellites and they can send a drone anywhere in the world, and you don't have you have much less space because your satellites are flying however many kilometers. It's a little bit more like Starlink, but also there's a reason that US drones tend to be much larger and cost a hell of a lot more, because they have to have all of that power so that they can have some guy sit in a chair in Chicago on an Air Force base somewhere and operate those drones. That is, I believe, the model that Ukraine is going to inevitably move towards. And I think in the previous text that you read about how Russia is trying to recruit online gamers for drone operation, they're not doing that for the purpose of putting those guys on the front line. Not most of them. No, they are looking towards moving their drone operations into the U.S. model, which is more centralized. And they're probably figuring out where they're gonna put those repeaters. They're probably figuring out how are we going to convert some of our electronic warfare systems to also act as repeaters for our drones, that sort of thing. So it's a whole other level that you can't see. I mean, there's these waves, electromagnetic waves flying around in the sky all the time that we can't see, and that is another level of this war that you just can't possibly see. So when I see a larger drone, I see, okay, that's going to have longer range. There are also, I'm not going to say new antenna technologies, but antenna technologies that Ukraine is implementing that I don't believe have been implemented previously. And those are specifically, I'm talking about Yagi antennas, YAGA, Yagi. They're called Yagis, but they were actually invented by somebody else. Anyway, I won't go into the details of it, but basically what it is it's an antenna with a lot of other antennas on it, and it focuses the beam, not quite like a laser, but focuses the beam of magnetic rays, into about a 15-degree range. And you can take a Wi-Fi connection, for example, that might be a few hundred meters, and you can make it go like 15 kilometers. I'll show you this right here. This is what I'm using this is my studio reflector light, because see my face, I'm trying to make my face not so dark because of the lights behind me. So I've got a little reflector thing here, and this is actually from like one of the antennas that I would have installed in America.
Nice. Good.
Yeah. So
Nice,
an antenna would go right here. You can buy these here in Ukraine. You can buy them used for about 500 hryvnias a piece. Yeah. There you go. Yagi antennas. And they can be covered as well. They don't have to look they don't all look like that. A lot of them can look more like a Pringles can.
Right.
Basically. And that's what this one, the one that fits in here, would be more of a Pringles can type. And these things are incredibly cheap. So for 500 hryvnias, that's like $10. I can set up a wireless connection that is going to be like maybe up to 15 kilometers. That's the last mile thing that is going to happen here in Ukraine that needs to be covered. And why not set up a whole? I could, for 500 hryvnias a piece, so $1,000 hryvnias per connection, $20 per connection. We could cover all of Ukraine with these wireless connections. That, I mean, Russia doesn't have enough bombs for that,
So the question then is, can Novorossiysk realistically be hit by drones?
Oh, that was the easy. You just wanted the easy answer. I'm sorry. Never ask an expert, an easy question.
Well, no. I mean, this is about how they do it and how what sorts of, because there's also like, can they use underwater drones? I don't know what the communication for something like a torpedo drone would be and the kind of range you would need for something like that. There's a lot more resistance and a lot more fuel would be needed.
If you don't need that feedback communication backwards, if you have a sophisticated enough computer essentially on the drone that has maybe a little bit of AI recognition and it's programmed, you have GPS, but of course GPS can be blocked, so there are other ways to calculate position, okay, and direction, altimeters and all that sort of thing. You have those sophisticated systems programmed into the drone. I mean, a computer the size of my phone would do that. There you go. There's my phone. Wrong side of the camera. Would do that, and it's just a matter of the sophistication of the engineering and the programming. In that, there's a.
Oh, I can't hear you. You've muted yourself.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know. Magic.
Okay. Okay. So every major drone company and a lot of the smaller ones, even the Magyar battalion, has said they are working on AI for target recognition.
Yeah.
So that's the next thing, and it's probably already there.
I just think Novorossiysk, you're going to start seeing open season on that fairly soon, because
very soon.
It is where the Black Sea Fleet is mainly now hanging out, and Ukraine need to be able to take out the ships and submarines that are releasing those cruise missiles. It might be easier to take out the Black Sea Fleet than it would be to take out the bombers that are releasing the cruise missiles from inside Russia. I don't know, but one of those two will be easier to achieve, and I'm sure they'll be going for the easier option first, or predominantly. Now, with regard to your good self, as we sort of meander to an end, here's your channel. Please subscribe to American in Ukraine. Why Ukraine? We've already seen that just jump up almost 20 since the beginning of this video. So thank you very much to those who have done that. Please subscribe to that. I'll put it in the live chat now. You have a Shopify thing here, a link on your main page that takes you to a Shopify account. What have you done? What are you doing?
Yeah, all right. Thanks for letting me talk about this. I have skipped my live stream for the last 2 days. Sorry for those of you who were hoping for that. I've had to skip my live stream because I've been renovating, and I'm still not finished, but it's good enough that I can show it. Kind of, it's a bit of a mess. If you scroll up here, JP, so I'm fine tuning this. That I'm in communication with people in the Legion. And in particular, the commander of the 4th Battalion Training Legion, for like what they need. Okay, so I'm refining that, getting that up here on the site so that people can support the Legion. And I want everybody to take a real close look. There you go. That's the toilet. First of all, this is going to sound crazy, okay? And I didn't want to talk about it for obvious reasons. When I first started this page and even my channel, but in the training barracks of the Legion, that's what our toilet looks like. I'm sorry to be showing this on your channel, JP, but that's all
right. I've been on French trips from school in my childhood, and that was pretty normal for going around France in the 1980s.
So I got to tell you, those of us from the United States are like, what? From Canada, from Australia, we're like, what do we even do with this? Like, we have no idea. Unless you're from, like the Soviet Union or China, you basically have no idea. I saw new recruits come in and they were afraid to poop for like days, for like once a week, they could squeeze one out, and they just, it's terrifying. And it was so terrifying that I had someone order me a foldable camping toilet that I put on top of this, just so that I could sit down. And my commander, my squad leader, I've never seen anyone so thankful in his life. He had IBS, and the bathroom was right. The open window was right next to where we would all have to line up for formation. So we would have to hear him in the morning too, and and so what we need here is a toilet solution that works for everybody from all over the world. We've got 40, 50, 100 guys in one big giant building, and we're going to provide them a proper goddamn toilet. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I found these camping toilets. They're actually, you can buy them online, but there's actually some in my village. And we're going to attach them to a footstool so you can put it, yes, right there. So you can put it over this rudimentary hole and have an actual toilet experience. And these things are removable so they can actually be cleaned. It's sanitary. It'll keep the toilet covered so it's not just open every time you flush, splashing germs and that rise up into the air and go everywhere. When you have guys in a barracks like this, all the beds are like 2 feet apart. One guy comes in with COVID. This happened twice while I was there. One guy comes in with COVID. Everybody's down. People were being hospitalized. People had to go home. This is yes, thank you. I've never seen a toilet like that. Yikes.
So this is Lynn. You need to come to Europe. Basically, you need to experience like some old school European toilets, not in the UK
or German toilets.
Go on holiday in Europe, and you'll see a number of those. I don't know how much anymore, but certainly back when I was a kid,
it's scary. And these things are all over Ukraine, and I've been traumatized by them certainly. So this is going to help a lot. Now, this is the thing. Like, the thing that people don't realize is the International Legion for the Defense of Ukraine realize, except for weapons, everything is donation. All of their armor, their uniforms, the food that they eat is all donated.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Really good point.
Yeah. And so people like, this is why people like Greg Terry and these NGOs are so absolutely vital, because there's a no, I don't know if Greg Terry is one of them, but there's a number of NGOs that basically all they do is deliver stuff, for the International Legion. But soap is not worth crossing 1,000 kilometers with a big bucket of soap. You know what I mean? So we literally had no soap, nothing to clean the floors with, nothing to wash our hands with for like a week. Our guys had to walk down, to the local convenience store and buy their own soap. When you have 50 to 100 dudes in a room with open toilets, man, we need soap. There's one shower.
Something I've wondered before is, what do people fighting on the front lines do? If you're in trenches 24 hours a day and you're right in the front line, how do people crap? I have wondered that. Like when you've got bombs flying around and you're like, man, I haven't been for 24 hours. I really need to go.
A plastic bag, and you tie it really tight,
right.
and then if you're lucky, you might get a chance to throw it out the side and then retrieve it later or bury it later. But that's the situation.
So you crap in a bag, and then you could.
Yeah, I haven't had this experience, but I know people that have been stuck in a hole for 3 or 4 days, and that's what they had to do. I mean, I've done it in America on like river trips and things like wilderness trips and things like that. So
yeah.
But this stream has gone to the toilet. You know what? Maybe there's a reason I decided to do my big reveal on JP's live stream instead of mine. It was my secret plan all along. But yeah, so basically what I'm doing is I'm putting soap, big bulk things of soap. By the way, the picture there, the picture of guys mopping, that's actually from Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what our barracks look like and what it looks like when we're cleaning. We don't have white t-shirts, but and we don't have a sergeant that looks like that, but it basically like that, but with a lot more people packed in to the room. So I'm gonna. We've also got trash bags, so we need to take out the trash twice a day. We're constantly running out of trash bags. I've got big trash bags on there. I'm gonna add the little trash bags because the little trash bags need to go next to the toilet. If you scroll back up, I hate to show the toilet again, but if you scroll back up, you can't put toilet paper in that toilet. Okay.
Yeah, so this is, and again, Americans might be surprised at this, but I was on holiday in Crete in quite a nice hotel over the summer, but the plumbing, Greece has very small pipes, and so they have bins next to the toilet, and you have to put your toilet paper in the bin, and that's just a really weird concept for me. But yeah.
And Darren just said influenza in 1918-19 killed more U.S. troops in barracks than the front lines in Europe. Yeah. Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. And it took us down, man. One guy came in with COVID. He didn't know he had it until a couple of days, actually like a week later. But sure. And it passed. It took like a month before the whole thing passed through because new guys kept coming in, new guys get sick. So I'm going to be adding it, and it's going to be a little bit more organized. So it's not just all mixed up with, I'm going to have like one column for basic stuff like this, and then another column for things like body armor, another column for something else and something else. So I've been working my ass off on this, trying to. I had to get the back end done. I need to have the purchasing. I need to make sure I can buy these things with my American card. Sometimes that's a difficulty here in Ukraine. I need to make sure that the seller has them on a regular basis.
It's just interesting that the International Legion, of course, you just think, well, you'll be funded or they'll be paid by the Ukrainian government for like your basic amenities and stuff. But no, they're just a separate entity entirely. And so everything depends on donations.
The next thing that's going to go up here is toilet paper. We have to buy our own toilet paper. They don't provide toilet paper. So
this is where you, sorry to interrupt, but this is where, because I was thinking about this morning about like what I would do if I was Jeff Bezos, right, and had like $100 million. Like all it would take is like, it's just pocket money. You'd say to the International Legion, guys, here's $10,000 just for your basic stuff. Seriously. Like, and that'll keep you going for like ages on. Do you know, it's really frustrating. Like you've got all these billionaires around the world that they are doing stuff, and they are obviously but some of them, yeah, because I saw an interesting analysis on quite who are doing stuff. So it's people like the Soros Foundation doing an awful lot for Ukraine, this is but then certain other billionaires are just like completely absent. But you just think that's pocket money to just allow the International Legion.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a roll of toilet paper is 11 grivnas. Okay. Yeah, Cheryl, thank you. And I'm going to put those up on the site too. But the problem is some people, some guys show up with nothing. They have nothing. They show up to the Legion and maybe they have military experience, maybe they don't, but they have zero money. So when you don't have a single kopinka, where are you going to get toilet paper, even if it is 11 grivnas, which is like, I don't know, like it's like 30 cents or something, So this is a real problem. And why should we have to buy our own toilet paper? God damn it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good. So people can support you by finding you on American in Ukraine, Why Ukraine. So obviously go and please subscribe to his channel.
Yeah. At sign Why Ukraine. If you just go on YouTube and you put @WHY Ukraine, that's the tag, and that'll find me. If you put Y and then Ukraine, I don't know, maybe I should rebrand or something. Sometimes it's difficult for people to.
But I do the search Why Ukraine American, and it comes up with yours straight away. Good. So yeah. So please go and find him. Please subscribe to him, and if you can, I know we've been doing a lot of fundraising recently, and Greg Terry at the moment is in Ukraine doing some wonderful stuff. But this is great as well for the International Legion, and James.
$5 could save a life, really. $5 worth of soap, and I've got the inventory set to People can only buy 1 month worth of soap at a time.
Yeah.
I don't want to, because the Legion doesn't have the space. If you said, "Oh, here's $10,000 worth of soap," it would be insane. So,
and of course, there's tourniquets as well, rain gear,
yeah,
protection, bulletproof protection. There's all sorts of stuff. So
important
whatever floats your boat, there's stuff for you guys to get behind,
That's
and
right.
it's really important. James is doing an absolutely fantastic job to help out those that he knows in the
And we
International
just
Legion.
we just had our first actual successful delivery. We arrived this week. So if you go to the website, you go to the community tab, you'll see I posted a picture of the first boxes. It's like the beta test of this system that I'm doing, which is to take advantage of existing logistics systems. Nova Posta, which is the post office, and take advantage of online shops. Yeah, you scroll down. There you go. Yep, there it is. So these are the first 3 boxes, 15 kilograms of supplies. This was basically wool socks, rain gear, and secondhand military uniforms. So.
Yeah, so and all that stuff is on there that you can select that, and here it is. Here's evidence of it getting to the International Legion. So if you guys want to help out the International Legion, please pop along to James's his website there, his Shopify website, and help him out. Help them out.
Thanks.
Help him help them.
Thanks
Thanks for that. I've got to sort of shoot off now, but I did want to say, thank you so much for coming on and for doing what you're doing for the International Legion. I also need to say a massive thank you, and let's just go through these. So Richard Bennett, thank you for gifting those memberships. You're such a good supporter of the channel. And again, Johnny Christensen, who is a great Danish supporter of the channel. Hey, Jay and Jay. James is Nestor Mano considered a hero in Ukraine, and is there still a community around the ideology he had?
Thank you for asking this question. Just very quickly, I can tell you that unfortunately, I frequently have to teach Ukrainians about Nestor Makhno, which is really interesting. And I would love to spend some time talking. I'm so glad you brought him up. So speaking as an anarcho-socialist. Nestor Makhno formed the very first and arguably only functioning anarchist state in the world, in world history. Okay, during the Ukrainian Revolution and Civil War. They made this is in the 19-teens and early 1920s. Nestor made the mistake of occasionally allying with the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks used the black. They were called the Black Brigades, by the way. And the red and black flag was not originally a symbol of, it's a Nazi symbol or something. It was a symbol of the Makhnovitsi, or the Black Brigades. Okay, because they symbolized, they were anarcho-socialists, so they symbolized their association with socialism and anarchism with the red and black flag. And they were crushed by the Bolsheviks mercilessly after the Bolsheviks defeated the whites. So anyway, they don't, unfortunately. So yeah,
interesting. Anyway. And it's particularly interesting because James, I don't even know his background. He only told me today but it didn't surprise me. I see this quite a lot. Is that he comes from a background of very conservative, evangelical, religious, fundamentalist, Republican, etc., background.
Foursquare Pentecostal.
Background in the US, and so he's obviously not there now, both in the US but in that kind of worldview either. And so interesting. So you have some insights into the thinking. You were talking to me before about
very deep
the insights into the understanding of some of that MAGA republicanism that is fighting back against this kind of pro-Ukrainian positioning, which then leads me on to John Panciotti. Thank you so much, John. The Orange Clan loves dictators, which is something that I have talked about previously, which is strong men really like other strong men, or certainly in the case of him. Thank you, John. That's really, really kind of you. Peter van der Reet gifted some memberships as well. Thank you again, Peter. You're such a kind supporter of the channel. Awesome. So, John, and also thank you to David L, who says thank you for all you do. And I really appreciate it, David. Without you guys, I'd be unable to do this. So thank you, all of you guys. And finally, Tanya Rindenko, again, supporting the channel. So thank you, Tanya, for that super sticker. So just my big thanks to Richard, Johnny, David L, John Panciotti, Peter, and Tanya Rindenko as well. Really appreciate all of your support there. Final words to you, my man James.
Oh yeah, I just want everybody come to the site and help us get some toilets and some basic cleaning supplies. First come, first serve. Essentially, there's only 6 things of soap. We only need 3 toilets. So if you want to participate, don't waste your time. I will be adding some more things that we need, though. However, so keep checking back, and these things will be refreshed on a monthly basis as the Legion continues to need more of these items.
And thank you so much to Lynn Ned. Surprise, it's us gifting some memberships as well. That's really generous of you, and you are just a tremendous member of this community. And it is a community. We do get our social needs met to some degree from hanging out with each other, and we kind of find that we get to know each other a little bit as well. And that's just absolutely wonderful. I appreciate all of you being there. And also the support, more importantly, the support you give to Ukraine and the Ukrainian defense of their own country, but also of our own belief in freedom and democracy in the world. And that's super, super important. James, it's always a pleasure, never a chore. Thank you so much for your help and for being here, and congratulations with your first delivery, and maybe the first of many, although not too many. I'd like the war to finish, and I'd like you not to be having to do that. So yeah, and here you go from Johnny. Give James some days toilets passport. Thank you so much, Johnny. That's really, really kind of you. And also just to let you know that Pierre, who is base.ua, that you can check out doing work in Ukraine, he's like, to end on a bit of a sad news, 5 children, 6 adults killed so far in this evening strikes on Prokrovsk. And I think he's out there at the moment. He's back out there, having been for a couple of weeks back in France. So thanks for what you do as well, Pierre. It's incredible.
Remember why we fight.
Indeed, it brings it home. Can I add links to those donation sites on a permanent basis? Vigo, that's a great question, and I will try and do that and add it to, like, goodness me, because I don't have enough links on my descriptions to my videos as it is. But thanks, Johnny, by the way, and Vigo, I'll look at doing that. Actually, that's a good suggestion. Take care, everybody. All the very best. Speak soon, and thanks so much, James. Stay on the line, and I'll
love Ukraine.
Absolutely. Toodle pips, y'all.